Hi, my name is Paul Rayson from the School of Computing and Communications at Lancaster University. In this presentation I'm going to talk through our work in progress on the Corporate Financial Information Environment project running at Lancaster University. This is joint work with other colleagues in the Accounting and Finance Department, Professor Steve Young, and also the research assistant on the project, Mahmood, from the School of Computing and Communications. So the project that we have running at the moment, the CFIE project, is about halfway through. It's a 2-year project, and we've had funding from the ESRC as well as the Institute for Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. Other partners on the project are at the Manchester Business School and LSE in London. With the global financial crisis a few years ago, the focus in accounting and finance research has turned recently to the quality of financial reports and corporate communications in general. In previous accounting and finance research, they've been able to undertake manual analysis using qualitative analysis approaches, but only on a small scale. So our aim here in this project is to scale this up and allow researchers to use the computational techniques from computational linguistics and natural language processing to scale up this type of analysis and look at a lot more reports over a wider time period. So in the CFIE project we have 5 overall objectives. Here in this presentation I'm mainly going to focus on the first 2. Our focus in Lancaster is mainly on tool development and method development alongside that. One of the key things we're trying to do is to allow a focus on the specific structures of the published reports and, as I say, allow a large-scale comparison to take place automatically and with a manual assistance. We're looking at a variety of features which I'll tell you more about in a minute. So we're developing the NLP, natural language processing tools, to now allow the accounting and finance researchers to carry out this automatic analysis of the narrative communication practices as envisaged in the annual financial reports. We're then going on to use these tools for looking at linguistic characteristics in the corporate disclosures, in our case in particular the annual financial reports, but also some other quarterly reports later on. So here in this talk I'm going to focus on the NLP techniques that we've developed and that we're using from previous US studies which have been undertaken manually on a much smaller scale. There are some existing methods used in the accounting and finance research area, but by our standards they're quite basic, e.g. for example counting frequencies or applying word lists. So in this talk I'll describe our work so far on extracting structure from these annual financial reports, and I'll tell you why that's important in a minute, and also why we need to do this, and I'll then finish off with some initial results and our plans for future work. So, as I say, there have been previous studies on a much smaller scale using manual analysis techniques on the US style of annual financial reports, and here I want to show you why this is a bit more tricky to apply in our case in the UK context. So why do we need to worry about the structure? A lot of previous research has taken the entire annual report that a company has to submit or manually extracted one section. In the US, the structure of annual financial reports is a lot more rigidly defined. Here, for example, you can see the 4 parts and 15 separate section headings as listed here. And in the US, the companies have to pretty much abide by these section headings. So if you examine 2 different annual financial reports from Starbucks and McDonald's, for example, and look at the section headings, you can see pretty much they're very similar across the 2. However, if you look at the situation in the UK, well, the annual financial reports are pretty much unstructured. There's no standard structure, there's no rigidly defined structure that is defined in legislation. Companies tend to view these in a kind of brochure format, so there's lots of images alongside the text. These tend to be in PDF format rather than in plain text in the US, and hence there's a lot of content and content and structure variation across the firms across all of these different years. And the companies have a lot more discretion over what they include in terms of topics in these reports. However, as well as making our job more tricky, this actually makes the extraction and analysis task a lot more interesting, because it provides us with some opportunities to describe these different structures and describe the way that different companies and different time periods allow a focus on certain parts of the report and certain topics. And then we're going to link this to how informative a certain report is, or the quality of the disclosure that the company is making. So accounting and finance researchers have not been able to compare the structures of these reports on such a large scale before, so that's what we're aiming to allow people to do using our systems. If we have a look at some examples of UK annual reports, here's the first one where the company has grouped their sections into three, the last one focusing on the quantitative numerical information in the financial statements, but then they've grouped the rest into a business review section and a governance section. Here's another example where the report is structured into multiple sections. The final section again is the quantitative numerical information, financial statements and so on, but the other sections are much more loosely defined here, with the chairman's statement separated out from the business review and the director's report. Things get even more wacky here. In another sample, there's no overall hierarchical structure. You still tend to have the quantitative information towards the end of the report. So as you can imagine, this makes it much more difficult to extract this information automatically using the software. So what have we done so far to try and tackle this problem? The overview of the system here, as you can see in a flowchart view, what we have is multiple sections processing these annual financial reports, which appear to us in PDF format. We would first of all convert these to text, or use an OCR tool to convert the images to text. We would then might need to extract automatically these bookmarks or section headers from the reports, and then extract the sections and tables from that, apply our NLP, our computational linguistics techniques at multiple levels, maybe part of speech analysis or semantic analysis. We then have a series of readability and other metrics that I'll talk about more in a second. Finally, we envisage two different scenarios where researchers would have the results presented to them either through a web interface or perhaps on a command line tool where they could export all of the numerical data that we're extracting from these reports. We envisage that this would be applied on a very large scale to 10,000 or so annual financial reports. We looked at lots of different ways of extracting the text from the PDF documents themselves. There's very many different formatted PDFs that we're trying to deal with here, as I've shown you in the examples. So extracting the structure is a tricky task. Previously we've worked with Multivalent from the University of Liverpool, which allowed us to retain some of the text flow in a PDF, but now we found that with the requirement to extract the structure, then libraries such as iText is much more suitable for our purposes. This is an open source existing library that we can utilize in our software. Also, commercial solutions do exist in Adobe Pro, as you might think. Extracting information from PDFs is possible, but you'd have to purchase a license for this system. We're using existing libraries for the readability measures and other metrics which are available to us. We've used the statistics that have been applied so far in existing accounting and finance research. So they've used Flesch Kincaid and Gunning Fogg indexes for readability. We're also applying simple word list metrics such as forward-looking, hedging, sentiment or tone, uncertainty, and risk and challenging information. But one of the aims of the research that we're trying to address is the requirement to look at how we can improve on these existing metrics and measures. It might be the case, for example, that off-the-shelf readability measures aren't suitable in this domain, and it might be the case that we need to apply much more complex contextual information further than word lists. So, to focus in on the structure extraction, I've already explained why we think this is important to do. Here's what we've done so far in terms of two approaches. First of all, we could use the existing bookmarks that are available in some of the annual financial reports, but also we would like to extract and process the content page and the structure of the document without having to rely on the existing structure or bookmarks identified manually in these PDFs that are available to us. So we're focusing on these 11 sections in the financial report, as I've shown here, and another 3 in the financial statement. So these are the sections, the 14 sections overall, that we would like to extract for every single one of these 10,000 annual financial reports. But all these sections are not always present. Sometimes they're merged, sometimes they're not there at all. In different companies represent these in different ways, and they use different titles and section headings for these in their reports. So how do we get around this? So if we focus in on one of these sections, the chairman's statement, what we're doing is defining a process where we look for all of the headers containing any one of these synonyms for chairman's statement. So this might be chair or statement or introduction or letter to shareholders, for example. The accounting and finance experts that we're working with have looked at these and extended them based on their expertise and their knowledge of the synonyms of these terms in that domain. We've then inserted this list of synonyms into a database table that we can then run over all of the financial reports that we've seen. So we're starting off with a test set of around 250 annual financial reports that we're running this process through. So in terms of results, what we're seeing from our 250 collection test set, well, we've looked at a list of these synonyms, as you can see here, for chairman's statement. So these might be represented in the different reports in all of these different forms here. And we carry out fuzzy matching. And from our 250 reports that we've started with, we can do pretty well here. We can extract matches in 237 cases out of 250. We can get exact matches for all of these patterns in 229 reports out of 250, and partial matches in another 8. So this is pretty good. Out of 250, we can do pretty well for this section. A second section that I'll show you here is the corporate governance report, and again we've defined a set of synonyms, as you can see here: corporate governance statement or director's statement on corporate governance. And out of our 250 test set, we can get a match, an exact match on 232 of these. So we're not doing too bad. In terms of the readability measures on this test set of 250 PDFs, we've also experimented, as I said before, with off-the-shelf readability measures that we haven't changed. We've just used them as they exist at the moment. And as I said before, we intend to undertake an evaluation of how well these measures do, and whether, in fact, accounting and finance researchers can agree on what readability is for these sample reports. So we're going to have a manual test as well to see if the automatic readability measures match up to what accounting and finance researchers might think in terms of readability. So this graph shows you the results of one of these statistics, the Kincaid readability measure, over a number of annual financial reports. So readability score is higher the more complex a document is. So what we're aiming for is, or what the chairman's statement might be aiming for, is a more readable, lower score here for their section. So the red line represents the section of the report, the chairman's statement, and its readability, whereas the blue line represents the readability score for the whole text. So the point here is that for previous research in accounting and finance where they've used the whole report rather than just the chairman's statement section, there is quite a difference. You'd expect some variation across all of these different companies, but you can see, for example, that overall the whole annual report is a little bit less readable, i.e. the readability score is higher in the blue line generally across all of these annual financial reports. In a couple of cases the red line does go above the blue line, so for example for Inchcape and William Hill the chairman's statement there is a little less readable than the rest of the report. Looking at how the readability measures vary across the sections, we've got another chart here that shows that. This is for the Flesch readability measure, and you can see in the sections listed across the bottom the corporate governance report and the chairman's statement are generally less readable than the operating review and the highlights, for example. So this shows you that there is quite a bit of variability across these average scores across multiple sections extracted from multiple reports. And in this last chart here we're showing a number of the other metrics that we're extracting: forward-lookingness, hedging, negatives and positives. So again across some of these sections that we've extracted automatically from these reports. So the financial review and the director's remuneration report tends to have a lot more positives in there than the other sections. And you can also see the variation in forward-lookingness is particularly high again in the director's remuneration report compared to highlights or operating review, for example. So you can see with that set of variation that it's important to apply this process of extracting the sections and carrying out your analysis across different sections of these reports, because there's a lot of variation within them. So what challenges have we seen, and what challenges remain in the work that we've got left to do? Well, we don't always want to rely on the bookmarks that are inserted manually from the data provider Perfect Information. We'd like to have a system that allowed us to extract the structural information and the bookmarks and the section headers automatically from these reports. There is a lot of variation in the subheaders, the section headers, across the different companies and across the years. So our system that we're building needs to have some flexibility in there to allow this to be accurate over so many reports and over time. So what we're doing now is, as I say, to extract the content page and therefore look at the section headers and the subsections of the report. So this needs to be flexible to allow for the non-standard section headings in there. So we're looking at extracting the contents page, see what page numbers correspond to page numbers in the PDF, and then see whether we can extract these sections out automatically. So overall the novelty here is in this application of metrics within these internal sections of the annual financial reports. And as I've said, we need to in the future review and evaluate these different readability metrics and other measures in this domain to see whether they're appropriate to use and update them based on our knowledge of corpus-based NLP techniques. Then once we've done this, we can apply this on a much larger scale. We've now downloaded about 10,000 annual financial reports and looking at extending this to other pre-close statements and preliminary earnings announcements. Other things we want to look at in the future is the way that companies deal with the impression that they give across, the impression management as it's called, and how they attribute positive or negative earnings forecasts within the financial reports. So possibly if you've got a good earnings forecast coming up, then you might attribute this to good performance within the company, but perhaps we might find if there's not so good news coming up, then the companies might attribute this to the general financial markets in a particular sector, business sector. Okay, so that's it for the work in progress summary of the CFIA project. If you're interested in knowing more about our work, please have a look at the website on ucrol.lancs.ac.uk/CFIE.